We did an analysis of where the flood's coming, and it's only 2 blocks away from this house. So where does that stormwater go when we have 4 feet of sea level rise by 2080? That's scary stuff. These houses are 200 years old, and are they going to make it to be 300 years old?
Welcome to the Passive House Podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House Podcast. Well, welcome back to the Passive House Podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand. And I'm joined this week by Mary James. Good to see you, Mary. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, good. I think we're coming out of the depths of winter in this part of the world. So days are getting slightly longer, and it feels like it's warming up a little bit. But I guess it's coming off the heat of summer for you.
Holding on to the last shreds of summer.
Yeah. And we're welcoming back this week, Ilka. It's been a while since we've had you on the podcast. Good to see you. How are you doing?
Yeah. Good to be back. I've been traveling a lot, so yeah, I'm happy to be back, and I'm not quite ready to let go of summer either.
Well, and you've been enjoying summer across the country by the sound of it, doing a bit of a road
Yeah.
trip and seeing not just the world, but big part of America.
Yeah, and Mary.
And Mary, yeah,
I drove across the country to see Mary in
getting to
California.
meet in real life.
Yeah.
And we've got a great interview that both of you conducted. It was quite a big conversation with three guests on talking about a very interesting. Was not just a project, a whole education series, which we will get into pretty quickly because there's a lot to cover in that. But before we do, just want to say a big thanks to our sponsors for Passive House Accelerator. Thanks to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, our founding sponsors, 475, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwall, and Zola. And thanks also to our champion sponsors, Buizo, Cascadia, European Architectural Supply, Thacro, Icon Windows and Doors and Intelligent Membranes, LG, and of course, Source 2050. All right. Well, Ilka, let's just a really brief intro. I mean, you do introduce it quite well during this conversation, but there's quite a lot going on. So just give us a quick rundown of our guests this week.
Well, the guests are. Sorry, I'm not prepared to say that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, don't worry about the guests. Just maybe just what you said before about the fact that it's a pilot project and
Okay.
and a series as well.
Okay. So yeah, so this conversation is really about a little bit like a educational series that was put on by Green Building United here in Philadelphia. So I was very fortunate to be able to join most of the series, and it's really following or looking at a project that is a row house that needed to be renovated, and the perspective to look at was really coming from like the new Phiuss REVIVE certification, and also looking at the Living Building Core certification or perspective. And yeah, it was really interesting to do it that way, and to have these little snippets of very deep dives into these different topics.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, let's jump into it.
So welcome to the Passive House Accelerator Podcast. Today we will be talking about a project and how it is being used to educate practitioners through a 6-part demonstration series hosted by Green Building United in Philadelphia. So this project pursues the new Phiuss REVIVE standard for retrofits and also aligns with Living Building Challenge core principles. So super interesting. And we are joined by Amy Cornelius. She is a sustainability consultant of Green Beams, Paul Thompson, principal of Blue Path, and Joe Messier, project manager at Revision. So welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Thank you, Ilka.
Yeah, thanks.
So Amy, let's start with you. So you're one of the brains behind the series and a lot of things actually that Green Building United does. So can you introduce yourself and tell us about your role within GBU?
So I am an independent consultant. I work for myself. I work with a lot of different clients trying to set their goals and strategies around resilience and sustainability so that they can meet their project goals and their long-term goals for their companies. I have been a member of Green Building United since maybe a year after it was started. So Green Building United is a conglomeration of three organizations, really. Delaware Valley Green Building Council, which was started as an allied chapter of USGBC, U.S. Green Building Council, to support and educate around the LEED program. So LEED is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Not sure if everybody in this audience knows that, but after DBGBC was started, two other organizations started, the LBC Living Building Challenge Collaborative, which supported Living Futures LBC program to try and educate around that, and the GPP, Greater Philadelphia Passive House Association, GPPHA, which was to make Passive House the new normal for construction. And it seemed silly to have these three organizations have administrative, have all the things that go along with running a not-for-profit. Let's bring them together, since we're pretty much talking to the same audience and trying to get to the same end in different ways. So it's become a really good synergy to have this organization become united. So that's where the United come from. And then there's two other communities within Green Building United. The Delaware community, which looks at the entire state of Delaware and helps to move policy and education there, and in the Lehigh Valley, which is in Pennsylvania, but just outside of Philadelphia. So it's a regional organization that has a lot of things going on. Is that?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And that's actually fairly recent. Well, I don't know. When did that happen? Like 10 years ago?
I'm going to say 9.5, 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's relatively recent, but
Yeah.
it's really saved a lot. I think that the collaborative was struggling to try and be a not-for-profit. Definitely GP, whatever it is, was also struggling. And here we are, and we have a great support network within the staff at Green Building United, and it frees the groups to do great education programs like this one we want to talk about.
Yeah, and I think what's special about this this series that you put on is because we looked at, or you looked at a project, but we're looking at it from two different perspectives. One is the new Revive certification from Phiuss, and then also through the Living Building Challenge lens, which it's really educational, really interesting, but also kind of brings at least those two groups together into one session, which was actually, so I participated sorry, now I'm stuttering here. So I participated, and it was just great to bring all these different knowledge bases together, because there are things that were talked about that usually don't get talked about during a Passive House meeting. So how did it come about? How did you start thinking about doing this?
We're challenged here in Philadelphia and probably all older cities by having a ton of row houses that need to be renovated. And I started thinking, how in the world are we actually going to do this? And do we have a program that's going to address that? And then along came this Revive program, and I thought, what is this? So I started reading about it, and it's all about carbon. It's a totally different path than what Phiuss has done in the past. And then thought, nobody knows anything about this. Nobody knows that Phiuss is making a U-turn on what they're doing or expanding outside the walls of the building. So Revive does that. It goes outside the building, not just inside the building, and expands Phiuss's take on what is Passive House. And then I thought, well, Core does that too at LBC at Living Future. So Core is like, what is Joe? What does Scott say? It's the entry point. No, it's the
Yeah,
entry point for, or it's like LBC Light or something. They say.
we kind of think of it as the inflection point between a truly regenerative project, which is full living certification, and then kind of what's just less bad, which you see a lot of times in the past in green rating certifications. So it's kind of that inflection point where you're just starting to tip into really thinking about how your building can contribute more than just meet the immediate needs of a typical building and do less bad.
But so I had a friend who was doing a renovation from a fire damaged house, and I thought he was struggling. And I thought if he had an outline for it, it might help him to be able to parse his project. Well, then all of a sudden, Paul comes along and says, I'm doing a Revive project. Why don't we just use my project? And I was floored. I thought this is a synergy coming right from the group. But I thought also it would be great to bring the Living Future and Passive House communities together to learn together so that there was cross-pollination across them so that everybody knows what everybody's talking about. Because sometimes we get in our channel and we don't talk to the other channel and we miss opportunities that way. So the whole purpose of this was to develop synergies across. But Paul, I don't think Paul realized at the beginning how much this was different than like a normal Phiuss project.
Great.
Is that-
Well, Paul, can you introduce yourself and tell us about your project, which I believe is called the Cross Street Passive House Project? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, my name's Paul Thompson. I'm an architect and one of the principals at Blue Path Design here in Philadelphia. We're Passive House architects. I'm happy to say that all of our projects that we do are either Passive House on the certified track or our Passive House performance or trying to get there. And so the sustainability and particularly energy performance is something that and building science-based design and performance is something that we think about every day. And we had this great opportunity when Amy and the folks from the Passive House community and Living Futures, where we started thinking about this demonstration series. We happen to have a client who in South Philly, it's a little 2-story brick row home. We're proposing to put a 3rd story on it. But they contacted us because they had a situation. It's funny, Laura, that Amy mentioned a friend with a burned out house. It turns out that the neighbor of this cross street project had a major fire. And so there was some smoke damage to our client's house. And so as part of the remediation, all of the finishes were taken down to brick and the old growth wood framing. And so they both, Ryan is an architect and Julia is a sustainability consultant working primarily on lead projects for commercial projects. And they work for the same firm. So they are in the architecture world and knew about Passive House. In the 10 years that they'd lived there, they had been doing little projects to slowly, sort of incrementally approach Passive House or performance or something as close as they could get. And they said, well, this is an opportunity since we're literally starting from scratch on another row home. Let's do Passive House certification. And there happens to be this new REVIVE certification process for retrofits. And so REVIVE 2024 it's a program that Passive House US developed for retrofits. And Amy mentioned, like old cities like Philadelphia, there's something like 480,000 row homes. And I'm going to say that there's 479,995 row homes that are not passive houses. And so we got to do something about that. And so Ryan and Julie were super enthusiastic. They were totally on board about making this a kind of a public process. So in addition to looking at the Phiuss REVIVE, the LBC Core, they said, why not have our project be a case study so we can sort of apply some of those thoughts, the crosswalk synergies or differences that we find as we work in the demonstration series. And let's get it out in the public because we want to have people know about this. And so we're very appreciative of them. Not only did they sort of put their architectural project out there in the public, they also they and their business they work for were really supportive, and they hosted the series. And so they were all in, and they've just been great clients, and totally on the same sort of mission of getting the word out, educating people, showing by doing, and putting their money where the mouth is. And so they're the perfect clients for this kind of project.
So let's go back real quick to the whole issue of certifying row houses as a passive house, because we have struggled over many years to certify through just the typical passive house standard, right? Because the row house, although it's so typical to Philadelphia and also Baltimore, it was just really, really hard to get through the certification process. And one of the reasons is because you're, flanked from both sides. You don't have a ton of solar exposure, right? And so you can't really play around with any kind of orientation as well. And the way the WUFI protocol worked for a long time was that you could not use your demising walls as adiabatic walls. Like it wouldn't count towards your exterior surface. So it was really, really hard just from the modeling perspective to meet that. So the protocol changed, so that became then a little bit easier. But this is a totally different ball game, right? So Paul, what is different, and why is it such a better fit now for our problem here or opportunity, right? Row houses here, I mean, they're in general so energy efficient, right? They're really, really good typology. We just need to make them a little bit more efficient. So why is this such a good fit?
Starting with the row house typology, it's those adiabatic walls that you talked about. They're sort of a natural energy efficiency because of those 6 surfaces. 2 of them are already not going to be transferring energy from one side to the other. At least the assumption is. Now, there are some situations where your neighbor might be unoccupied, but we're assuming that if you have a neighbor that they're heating and cooling their building too. So there's a natural energy efficiency that just comes from the building type. I have to say that I'm sitting in a historic row home that we renovated, we being my partner, Laura Blau, and I renovated, finished up about 4.5 years ago. And we are achieving PHI interfit performance levels. So we actually are using a little bit less energy than the energy model predicted for our building. So we're pleased about that. But one of there was a lot of there was a lot of learning. So as we were renovating this building, we ran into all those difficulties that that row homes have. There's only so much control. Trying to make them airtight, of course, is the most difficult thing. When there's lots of, there are shared joist pockets, and there are wood framing that has checks, and so making sure that we do sort of isolate the air in our thermal envelope can be really difficult. And so those are challenges that we knew that we need to apply to the cross street project and the case study, and to all of the projects we work on. What the new REVIVE system does, it uses a different energy model than it has in the past for the standard one. So the REVIVE, as a retrofit standard, looks at a number of things, beginning with resiliency and both embodied and utilization carbon. And so it recognizes that you may have situations like an existing basement slab that you may not be able to take out, even if it's uninsulated, for structural reasons or for financial reasons, or in our case, for geometric reasons. We just looked at the location of the bottom of our basement walls, and if we wanted to dig out the slab, we're going to need to underpin. And so that's just not part of this project. And so there are some of those limitations that the energy model and the analysis that it's actually called REVIVE Calc is the energy model that not only looks at energy, it looks at I mentioned embodied carbon and utilization carbon over a life cycle. So it's a life cycle analysis, not just the first initial beginnings of when you move in.
Well, it's also a net present value model, right?
Yes. So it's looking over the lifespan of, in this case, over a 70-year lifespan, including maintenance, including the energy use, including the additional stuff you put into the project. In our case, a third floor, and sort of expansion, including all of the equipment that we're adding to, and the insulation to make this energy efficient and to achieve passive house performance. And with one of the goals is really to make it resilient, as in looking at the worst summer months and the worst winter months. And so that's one of the really prime things that the energy model is looking at, to make sure that the house is livable under the most extreme climate conditions that are expected in this location. But
Paul, that's why I was talking about it's Phiuss looking outside the walls. It's not just what's going on inside that envelope, but what's happening from outside that's affecting the building, how the building affects outside with the carbon effect. And then it's a very forward-looking model. It's almost at a European level, looking at that cost to see what the cost is to society and to the project itself. So this is a big thought change for, I think, all of the modeling that we're doing across all of the certification programs. Phiuss has taken a step outside the door that I think everybody else is going to have to catch up with.
Well, but part of the process is also looking at assessing the existing conditions. Is the building in a floodplain? Are wildfires a potential problem? What about water? What about heating and cooling and things like that? So it really is, right, as Amy mentioned, it's expanding the definition of what does passive house mean, and what should we be looking at as we are either retrofitting or building new construction. One of the possibilities in this analysis is to say, we're just not going to build on the site. We're going to let it rewild. Now, this particular site happens to be a row home in South Philly. Like, there is no way this is going to be rewilded.
But Paul, that word made me almost fall off my chair when I read that about Passive House. And that's when I thought this could definitely be a synergistic thing with Living Future. Because Living Future, although they also don't say rewilding that often, they are looking at that site. And that's where I thought, here's a chance to say, okay, Living Future, you use Passive House to get to your energy goals, but here's Passive House reaching over and trying to shake hands with you by saying, we're looking outside the building. So that's where I thought that's our hook.
And that's a perfect time to talk about for Joe to introduce himself and talk a little bit about the Living Building Challenge.
Sure, yeah, thanks. My name's Joe Messier. I'm an architect and sustainability consultant at Revision Architecture in Philadelphia. Similar to Paul's firm, we're based in Manayunk in a 200-year-old carriage house that we've renovated and gotten LEED certification on. It's kind of our hub for the work that we do, the mission-driven kind of collaborative work that we do. We're kind of driven by this question on every project of what does good look like. And while we're pretty much agnostic to certifications, we definitely value third-party certifications, and we're always trying to connect what vision of good looks like with the values in these different certifications. And Living Building Challenge is one that we've have a deep connection with because we have achieved a full living certified project. We've done the first LBC core project, and so it's something that runs deep in our firm. I would also say that we like it because it is so holistic and it also goes deep. And Phiuss and Passive House has always been a great complement, particularly in the energy side of things. But Living Building Challenge, like I said, it's holistic. So it looks at 20 different imperatives across 7 different areas that we refer to as petals. And so those include things like place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, and then even equity and beauty. And so it's this very broad lens. And then when you get to, and so full living is doing all 20 across all 7. For core, and that's kind of more of a regenerative vision. There's very few buildings that have achieved that in the world, but you're being positive in what you're doing. You're improving your surrounding ecology, you're improving the water that comes out of your project, you're generating more energy than your project needs, you're ensuring that the interior is very healthy, and you're providing food for neighbors. So it's a great vision. Core says, okay, what's the inflection point between not just doing less bad, but starting to get to that path of regenerative? It's for lots of times when projects are like, we have ambitious goals, but we know we can't necessarily achieve those. And so core is a great intro for that. And it just says, okay, these are the 10 core imperatives that a project needs to achieve. And when Amy was bringing this opportunity up to the table, and I should also mention, I'm a co-facilitator of the Living Future community under GBU. And so that's kind of how I got involved. But even if I wasn't in that role, I definitely want to be involved because it's such a great opportunity to develop this crosswalk. Because as Amy mentioned, as Paul mentioned, this REVIVE standard really surprised me as I was digging into it, and to see how much it can align with Living Future's kind of principles.
Yeah, and I think, we'll talk a little bit more about where it aligns and where the synergies are and what was surprising and where maybe one can learn from the other. But maybe let's talk a little bit about how you set up this series, because I thought you did that so well, the 3 of you, because each day or each session was a different topic. And then you looked at it from both sides, and then you educated everyone who was there. So what were those different sessions, and what did you look at specifically and compared basically both standards with each other?
I happen to have that list up. I would not be able to remember it off the top of my head, but I did a little prep. In the first session, we sort of introduced, Revive, LBC Core, and the case study, and talked about this idea of crosswalks. For me, crosswalks was a new term that I'd heard but not really understood what it was about. But it was really to understand, where are the two standards, where do they align, where do they overlap, where are they separated, where might they even be in conflict? And so we were really interested in looking at those, say, four different types of analysis to see how can they help the projects be better. I know that I think that Amy was also thinking, how can we use this to influence and make both of the standards either more inclusive or deeper or stronger?
Absolutely. We were always thinking, what can we do to make it better and make it more aligned? One thing I don't think we mentioned before is Phiuss and Living Future were actively involved in this series. They were speakers. We consulted them. They were at this intro thing that Paul's talking about, and at the end summary. So having the support of the certification bodies was really great in this, because we could reach back and ask questions all the time.
Right, and we got some of the ideas about what was the thinking of Phiuss and LBC when they were developing these standards. So that was and then when you hear the thinking, you can start to think, well, do the results support all those thinkings, or how has it evolved? I'm going to say that, at least for the Revive, I believe that this standard is evolving and maybe becoming more practical as we have more projects, and as a result of this, the sort of crosswalk analysis, where Phiuss gets to sort of look at it in a kind of out in the wild, where other people are bringing in their own kind of takes on what does sustainability, what does resilience, what's really important about renovating buildings, and how much does embodied utilization carbon and all those other sorts of things that are all part of building and the urban environment and the built environment, how do they affect their own, Phiuss's own sort of passive house emphasis. So that was the first one. So a lot happened on the first introduction, because we had really keyed things up. Session 2 was looking at materials, and we mentioned that the Revive Calc energy model for the Phiuss certification includes an analysis of both the utilization energy and the embodied carbon in the materials, and again looks at it over a net present value situation, and we know that LBC has a real emphasis on materials, healthy materials. We of course don't want to build buildings that are a hazard to live in, and so we took a deep dive on that. Session 3 was looking at active carbon reduction. And to say that for each of these sessions, there was kind of a lecture and education part, but then there was a breakout session where we had fun doing activities with the groups, because we also not only wanted to educate, but we wanted to activate and engage the people that were attending, and to have real takeaways that they could take back to their practice or to their personal life, and could do some level of analysis and really apply what they were learning to their own lives.
I think beyond that, though, after the session, we followed up with a whole list of resources that they could use, and the copy of the session, and we gave them our workshop outline so they could do the workshops at home. So what the materials one We actually had the Green Building United got calls from lots of people who said, we want to do this in our office.
Yeah.
And because nobody knew how to read the different documents you can look at to analyze materials, especially from a living future standpoint. So that was great. And we tried really hard to be very open and share, and
Yeah.
not hold anything back so that the community could learn.
Yeah. I know
Can I
Paul's good. Go ahead,
Oh,
Mike.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, well, I wanted to let Paul frame out the full thing, but did want to circle back to kind of talk about this education, this outreach, and the exercises that we were doing while they were engaging, and I think a helpful break from just hearing lectures. They were kind of real world exercises, reflections of what we as professionals in this space are doing in our, thankfully get to do in our daily lives. And the materials session in particular, I think was really eye-opening to folks, because while it's really great to see Revive is embracing embodied carbon and operational carbon, LBC kind of sees that in the energy bucket, actually. It's about carbon and energy, whether it's spent before it gets to the site or on the site. But the materials, it goes, as Paul alluded to, it goes even deeper, and you start looking at these transparency documents and these environmental impact documents, and having to navigate and understand those is an education that we as design professionals just need to embrace more, so that we can just react to what's in the documents and not just navigate the documents. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I want to hear the end of the series, but just very briefly, when did the series happen and how many people were involved? Or is it still ongoing?
No, we conceived of this in the summer of 2024, and then we started it in November of 25, and then skipped December, and then had it 5 months into this year.
2024. So it was
So November 24,
2024.
and then all the beginning of 25. So
we finished it in May of 2020.
we wrapped up, and
Amy, do you want me to?
we're now trying to wrap up a final report, but that's going to be a little bit longer. But we did do a blog, so we did summarize it in a good blog that's sitting on the Green Building United website.
Okay, Paul, go ahead. And just how many people attended?
I was gonna say, I can rattle off those stats that Amy pulled together, because I actually have your slide up, Amy.
Oh, there you go.
So we had a steering committee of about 9 members. It kind of fluctuated as we were planning each session, but there were certainly 9 core members of that. We had over 19 firms and organizations involved in the planning, because we'd have different speakers at each session. And then I think 450 volunteer hours and well over 100 attendees. I think we had probably almost 100, 140, if I'm at 150. And these weren't just one time, they were repeat. 6 sessions is a lot to commit to, but it's really great to see folks come in and get excited and then keep showing up.
Great, thanks for those basics. Sorry, Paul, back to you.
Wait, before Paul does that, so the way it went was these two would talk. We'd start, and then we'd have Paul and Joe tell about what's going on in this particular session. We'd have a guest speaker, somebody from outside. Like, we had some pretty strong speakers come in and give a touch point to the topic, and talk about it in the real world, and why you should care about this thing. What is the reasons that you want to know about materials or energy? And then we would introduce this workshop, and then we do the workshop, and then we'd come back out, wrap up the workshop. These guys would talk a little bit more about, what the synergies were that we discovered, and then we'd all go home. So it followed a thing, but we found out that workshop really cemented all the learning from the different speakers, and people were blown away. I didn't know how to do that. I'd never done this before, and I'm not an architect. I just assume architects know everything, right? So, and here's all these architects telling me, I didn't know how to do that. I was like, don't you do that every day? No. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad we talked about it. Let's talk about it some more in another session. So it's actually feeding more sessions. We have one coming up with 475 about how to really deep dive into insulation. So that's part of this series now. It's going to be an extension of it. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, and before Paul continues, since I was there most of the sessions, I mean, just some feedback. I mean, what was really great is to see so many new faces. There are definitely people that, were kind of we've seen around, right? They had deep knowledge, but there are a lot of people that were just interested and didn't shy back from showing up. And I think it's because it was phrased as this demonstration project, right? So it's like, okay, it's pieced down into all these different parts, and there's something for everyone. And I think for me, eye-opening was also the materials session, because what I realized is how hard it is to read those documents. I mean, I've tried before, but not, you know, I was never that successful. And then sitting there with people that actually do that for a living and also not having all the answers and realizing, okay, this is something that needs to improve. It's not about us not really knowing how to do it, but it's also about the industry or whoever sets up standards on how to read these things. It has to get better because nobody's going to be able to read all of that.
And by things, do you mean like EPDs? Is that what you're
EPDs,
talking about?
yeah.
Environmental product declarations, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and kind of categorizing them. So what happened is that we had this kind of spreadsheet, and we were asked to place different materials according to different, you know,
Characteristics.
yeah, and just aligning the metrics, the
Yeah.
units. I mean, I think that's where most groups already just kind of failed. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it was eye-opening for
it
sure.
was definitely a good opportunity. So the framing of it was around mindful materials, common materials framework, which a lot of firms are buying into and supporting. It's a great database to go to if you're trying to understand the potential impacts of your products that you're eventually going to put in the building. But it is just starting to become the common language, I think, for folks. And so it was eye-opening to see that introduced to folks, and it's a great point. I mean, I'm in it every day, and I still struggle to read a health product declaration, which does have a standardized format, thankfully, not like an EPD, which is a little loose still at this point. But yeah, and then you get into declare labels from Living Building Challenge, and it's like, where are these pieces matching up? So yeah.
I thought it was interesting that Joe said fail. We didn't care if people failed in the workshop, and it was perfectly fine to fail because then everybody said, "Oh, wait, I have to learn more about this thing, whatever the thing is." And it gives us an opportunity to have another education session around the thing that people just couldn't do. Paul didn't get to all this energy thing yet, but when people had to do an energy budget in a house, they failed. And I thought that was going to be the easiest one. And we pushed this down to a very low bar of knowledge, and still people were unable to develop an energy budget. So they went home and learned how to do an energy budget, though, because they realized this is something we need to do.
Okay, Paul, getting back to you about the outline. Obviously, the materials session was very
Right. It was the materials was well. I think we're going to talk about sort of surprises or takeaways in a little bit, but yeah, that was a lot. That was a really fascinating topic. So session 4 was what we called active carbon reduction and electric. And so we were looking at well, we sort of talk about the survivability aspect of the Phiuss REVIVE and resiliency. But what was fun, of course, was the hands-on calculation of the energy budget that Amy just mentioned, and like how do you size? If you had a battery, what would you put on the battery so that you can have that resiliency for the hottest summer in the year or the coldest winter week in the year. And then session 5 was looking at water, and water that we use both in the house and water that lands from the sky onto your site. And like this, from the case study standpoint, this is a little row home in South Philly. There was about 16 times 8 square feet of rear yard, which is all concrete. But what do you do with all the water that hits that? It goes back into the sewer, because unless you're really smart, and we looked at some of the different ways, how do we hold that water on the site within the building or in cisterns below the backyard, or how do we use it for watering plants, whatever. So what do you do with the water? That's a real thing that was sort of an eye-opening takeaway that everyone could take back to their house, whether they lived in the suburbs with the big lawn or in the city with no lawn. And then the sixth session was sort of wrapping it up, where we reiterated and had really other great sort of closing sessions from spectacular guest speakers that came in and added their own little sort of take on what's important. For me, what was interesting is the definition of sustainability. It's the enormous umbrella that can cover almost anything from zero waste to zero energy to zero water. And everybody's maybe has their favorites, but I would say that we touched on a lot of those topics that some of which are sort of hard science numbers and some of which are a little softer, but they all come under that umbrella. And so that was, I think, one of the really strengths of the series was that we touched on a lot of topics in a pretty good in-depth way, and with some specifics that had real takeaways that people could apply to their lives.
So we need to maybe get a little more concise about all the lessons learned, because I'm sure there were so many. But so I don't, Joe, maybe you want to start with lessons learned, and then Paul also. And I, of course, want to know, how is the renovation going with all of these topics that you explored? What's the status of it, and anyway, how the series affected that?
Yeah, I think for me going into it, I wasn't fully aware of just how deep resiliency was the guiding principle around Revive. And so it was really eye-opening to see how well that aligns with Living Building Challenge, and the opportunity to talk about actually maybe LBC Core isn't enough. Maybe it needs, with Revive saying your project has to be resilient on these 2 key weeks in the year, that really aligns with a full living certified project. And so I think it kind of says, okay, LBC Core, you can move that needle a little bit further, which for me was really exciting to see. Obviously, the fact that embodied carbon is paired up with operational carbon, and so we're talking about holistically the carbon impact of a project, not just energy anymore, was great to see, because that is a definite alignment between the 2 certifications now. And then, I think there were other things where, just as we tried to unpack the Adorb calculator, and Paul did a great job of trying to walk the team through that, just acknowledging this is a new tool out there that LBC should recognize as a tool for teams that are endeavoring in that, to then use that as demonstration that they really have thought about reducing embodied carbon on their project.
So what are the tools that Living Building Challenge uses? Like, what are there any kind of calculators?
Whole building LCA, like One Click or Tally, are the common tools. Athena. So it's nice to see that kind of Phiuss is now that they've embraced embodied carbon and operational carbon. We are hopeful that And that was the great thing about having Phiuss and Living Futures represented in this. Like, we got to tell them directly, like, hey, there's this new tool, Living Future, take a look at it. And they said they would. So we're excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I could say from I'm going to put on my architect hat and not my Phiuss REVIVE crosswalk analysis. So from the case study standpoint, there were a number of things that I was surprised about, or maybe realized that needs a little more emphasis as an architect designing any project. We exclude a lot of information because we got plenty of stuff on our plate. But when working through the different sessions, certainly raising the awareness and the consideration of low carbon materials, and so I can say there was a direct sort of application of thinking about, in particular, insulation. I love wood. And that was one of the takeaways. It rekindled my love affair with wood fiber and wood insulation, and all the great results that wood is just an amazing material. Looking at the site water, the water issue, we will incorporate that sort of analysis for our clients, like, how much water do you use? And one of the takeaways I thought was really interesting is, like, when you look at all the water that sits on even our little South Philly site, the amount of water that you flush a toilet with is a little bit like the amount of energy that LED lights have compared to all of the energy in your building. And so it's important, but maybe not as important as some of the other things. Definitely not as important as some of the other issues. Renewable energy, right? Thinking about, maybe introducing the conversation about solar panels and renewable energy. And now you're generating energy. So what do you do with it? Now do you need to have batteries, or is there some other mechanism that you can think more holistically about, greening the grid and first of all, we start with we're not going to, a no fossil fuel emissions standpoint, but anyways, sort of thinking about what is important, and just that exercise of, do I need to have my refrigerator and freezer on the battery if the power goes out? Or is it more important that I have air conditioning because I have a neighbor who's elderly, and when their power goes out, I can help as a community member save lives, or at least help the neighbors survive better? Or anyway, so there was a number. I'm going to say that survivability and resilience idea really sort of expands, or could expand, the owner's project requirements about what do we want this project to do. And I think that directly comes from REVIVE, but maybe even more from the Living Building Challenge approach to thinking outside of the site, the lot lines, to how does our project, even if it's a tiny 2-story home in South Philly, how does that affect the neighborhood that's right nearby? And is there is the project go beyond its borders? Is that something that should be part of the project? Is it something that the owners and clients think is important? That's certainly something that we're going to bring to the table as the designers.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think that the trigger for this was, in REVIVE, you have to start thinking about and analyzing the climate risks. And so as you start to do that, you realize, okay, I should be a good contributor to the grid, because there's more and more taxation on the electric grid. So reducing our energy, getting us to a level where we could use renewables, we're then a good participant beyond our building to the grid as a whole. dealing with water. Maybe we don't consume all the water inside, but holding it on our site in whatever little areas we can, so it's not impacting our neighbors, because flooding and these torrential rains that we get, these flash flooding events, are a challenge in South Philly. And so, well, it's kind of just starting with those risks at the top, and then trying to think through with the owner how they can contribute more. It was great to see that alignment and shift, because you're right, Paul. It's much more of an LBC mindset of like what's beyond the walls, but it's really exciting to see that can bring value to a Revive project too.
We also got, I don't know if we want to include this in this, I'm just going to put that caveat out there, but we got into a philosophical problem on this survivability thing, because the workshop groups were saying with the energy, will I invite that older neighbor over to enjoy my air conditioning? And some of them said no. They didn't make the investment, so we're not inviting them over. And others said, yeah, we're going to have parties and we're going to have everybody over and we're going to have, water and everything at our house. And it was very interesting to see how different people approached, or groups approached, this community benefit of this one house in South Philly, which is going to have power in a power outage for a week, and in the cold or the hot. And I was surprised at the different groups' responses.
Yeah, and what was also very cool is that the actual owners were there as well, right? So they heard all of this and they learned all of this, and I don't think they expected all these different pieces to it. And they kind of talked at the end, the last session, and she actually got quite emotional, right? Just kind of thinking about how everyone poured so much time and effort into this and so much thought, and how important that was for her or for them and for all the participants. What I'm curious about, I don't know, I guess, Paul, you're probably the closest to the homeowner since you're the architect. Like, what was their take on it? Like, regarding inviting the neighbors, or is that something they ever really thought about until this? And like, what are they really taking back? Which pieces are they gonna, want you to incorporate? Because it's at the end, it's their decision, right?
Right. Well, it definitely it expanded all of our attention to what a project could be. I believe that when we started the project and they were thinking Passive House, focus was on energy efficiency. And then through the process of this series, as other elements were added in, and there was a robust discussion in the series, and as we were planning the different presentations, and at the presentations themselves, there were some conflicting or thoughts about what's important and what we should emphasize and what should be de-emphasized. To say that Ryan and Julia, they took it all in stride. They were considering everything. So when I put on my architect's hat, I'm looking at, well, basically, let's do it all is their approach. It's like, okay, let's think about the budget here. And so we're certainly at that point now. We have to get to the where is the project. To say, while at the beginning of this demonstration series, we engaged Phiuss to do the feasibility study to ask to whether this project was a good candidate for the new Phiuss REVIVE program. To say that I don't know that there have been any projects that have gone through this new series. So this is new to Phiuss, it's new to us. So we had a successful feasibility study, and it seemed like, yes, of course, this was a great project to retrofit a two-story brick row home in South Philly that's exactly what this Revive standard is for this kind of project. So now at this point, we had prepared documents. We got a contractor on board. Right now, we're finishing up the permit set, including the structural. Then we are going to go reprice the project and make sure that that Ryan and Julia can afford the project. And before we get too far along, then we're going to submit for permit. At the same time, we are working through the initial set of documents to have Phiuss review. So we're working on the energy model, this Adobe model, which is a model for looking at the carbon and both the energy use and the embodied carbon amounts, and the physical cost over the lifespan of the building. And so part of that is there is the energy component, which starts with a SketchUp model that's been used to analyze the energy use, and looking at all the materials. So one of the things that this process is adding is information on materials. And I was just talking with our energy modeler, and she's saying, well, do you happen to have the energy capacitance of a da-da-da? And it's like, I don't know. We're going to have to make some assumptions, because that is just not known information on every piece of every material that's in the building envelope. So that's part of this working through this new standard. But we are assuming that we're going to begin construction in August at some point. So it's real, it's happening. And a year from now, I'd be happy to come back and talk about the project, and hopefully they'll be moved in and there'll be a plaque on the wall.
Great. Well, I hope so too. Just for clarification, so you were talking about energy modeling. So you're still using Woofy for the energy modeling aspect, or is Adobe its own energy model?
Yeah, the Adobe model is, and it's the energy model that Phiuss developed is called Revive Calc, and that incorporates Energy Plus, which is the energy model. It's open source Department of Energy based model. It includes carbon analysis using Beam. So I think that's A1 through A3 of the embodied carbon analysis. It looks at it incorporates some of the other hazards materials, and it applies a cost of carbon, right? The assumed cost of carbon. It's very complex. It's not just looking at energy. And so when you throw things in like materials and predicting future cost of this and that, it'd be interesting. It's similar to the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. So like what we really want to do is to have that 70 years worth of information, so we can see that whether our predictions for what's happening 70 years from now, if we're starting from a good standpoint today. So, predicting the future is hard. And so we're making some assumptions, and I'm happy that that we in this project are, sort of contributing to predicting the future and trying to make sure we're on the right path.
Sounds like a huge scope for a retrofit project, which are often pretty intimidating to begin with for a lot of people. But congratulations. I mean, I'm definitely will be interested in a year to hear how it's going and how it went and everything.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all of that. I just have one last question for Joe. Like, going through this process, did this kind of change your perspective on approaching the living building challenge core, or how do you feel after doing this?
I mean, I was really excited to learn more about Revive and see it as a great pairing for when we're doing LBC core projects that are adaptive reuse type projects, I think it's kind of like a no-brainer to bring it to the table early on with clients, especially with, like I said, that upfront assessment part dovetails so well with all the upfront work we would typically do for an LBC core project.
Awesome. Great. And yeah, thank you, Amy, of thinking of making this whole demonstration series. I mean, it was definitely very effective, I would say. I don't know, did you get any more feedback from the group or from individuals?
People keep asking, when are we going to do it again? And I was like, oh my goodness, this was a lot of work. And then we need a project, and the everything aligned really well here. The planets aligned for us. We had a project, we had an open, the client was so open and welcoming. Joe and Paul are amazing partners to work with, and the constant like thinking, rethinking, being open, getting upset that I don't want to be at that open, and then opening back up. I think we grew through conflict and we grew through working together. So I loved it. And from this, I think we're going to do some programs on scenario planning, because one thing Paul didn't touch on was we did an analysis of where the flood's coming, and it's only 2 blocks away from this house. So where does that stormwater go when we have 4 feet of sea level rise by 2080? That's scary stuff. These houses are 200 years old, and are they going to make it to be 300 years old? Unsure.
Yeah, that was one of my takeaways is, thinking about the water and flooding and resilience and the relationship between them. And, at some point I realized that, if you can't flush your toilet, it doesn't matter how much battery backup you got, you can't live there. And so that was, I'm not that's outside our normal scope, but it's a reality that it does affect designing buildings, and I don't know what to do about it. Hopefully someone else, some smart person is going to figure that one out. Seems like a tough problem.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for your time. And yeah, maybe we can reconnect in a year or so and hear a little bit more about what the construction brought with it.
Thank you for inviting us.
And that was Amy Cornelius, Paul Thompson, and Joe Messier. Really a great conversation, and always interesting. I find it very interesting, anything that goes beyond Passive House and uses Passive House as a foundation. But then there's so much more to pick up on around healthy materials. Lots of conversation now about both embodied and operational carbon, and just those wider concepts of sustainability, not just physical sustainability, but also looking at the community, survivability, so many other aspects. And when we combine Passive House with things like living building, that's when some real magic can happen in terms of going beyond that inflection point that you talked about, of not just doing less bad, but actually creating buildings that make the environment and people healthier as a result of being there. So some pretty amazing stuff. And to have all that centered around a real life project, and then being focused on education is there's quite a lot going on there. Ilka, what you were there, as you mentioned, as during some of the series. What were the key takeaways from you?
So I think what I liked a lot about it is that it wasn't just a finished project or a presentation about a finished kind of successful project. It was really just an insight into a work in process, really. We were presented by what the project is, all the challenges, and then it was every session, it was really working through parts of those, perspectives. And nobody came with a solution, right? So the whole group of people that were there were trying to just kind of have conversations and figure things out. And I think Amy also talked about, we didn't necessarily come up with the perfect solution, or it wasn't perfect, but everyone just by going through that process and talking about it just learned so much. And then, what Paul as the architect and then also the homeowners who were there every time took away from these sessions is kind of on them a little bit. But I think as a community, it was such a great just learning experience, and also just getting together from different groups and learning from each other was just really, really good. Like I learned a lot about materials, although I thought I already knew quite a bit about it, but just diving into things like the EPDs and trying to read all these documents is not something that I had to do really for Passive House certification, but Living Building Challenge does. So just being able to have access to people that know a little bit more on how to do it and learn from them and just be a little bit more aware, that was great.
Yeah. Mary, what did you take away from the conversation?
Wow, there were so many points. Those clients were so patient with their project to let this whole process play out. I just thought that was admirable. And I'm sure, of course, they learned a lot in the process too. And the other thing, which is the breakout sessions where it sounds like you guys were doing the exercises. I mean, not just hearing about them, but doing them. And that's such a great way to absorb information, to get your hands involved and not just be sitting there listening. So I really like both of those things.
Yeah.
And, just as a pilot project for the Phiuss REVIVE, that was exciting too, because it's new and it's a different perspective on, going beyond the walls. I thought that was, all of it was great.
Yeah, I really like that concept of going beyond the walls and thinking about how an individual building can, or maybe doesn't, positively influence the rest of the community. And I think particularly around that issues around survivability of people, and the ability of a single building to protect more than those who just normally live in it. Some very interesting issues around that. I think it was. I agree, Mary. It's a really good point about the patience of the building owners, which makes me think about the scalability and sort of where to from here. You mentioned this is a pilot project, lots and lots of really great stuff in here. Ilka, where to from here? What do you think is the opportunity for either projects like this or programs? Is this type of thing scalable?
I think as just as an idea of bringing knowledge out to the community, I think it's totally scalable. I know that Amy and they all, and I actually participated as a one of the hosts in one of the sessions. So I got to see a little bit behind the scenes, and they put a lot of work into organizing and thinking through those sessions. But I do think that this can be totally taken as an example, or almost like a little playbook for other projects as well, right? You can do the same thing in California or in wherever they have a project and look at it from different sides, even if it's not combined with Living Building Challenge or whatever, but just the idea of taking an ongoing project and just talk about it and not just look at it once it's finished, or not having to be perfect, but just kind of working through things. I think that is totally scalable. The other thing, a big takeaway for me is since we actually had people from Phiuss and from Living Building Challenge or Living Future there who kind of heard what Paul and Joe were saying about how those two certification directions could maybe align or learn from each other. I think that has just a lot of opportunity as well. Just, seeing the revive. I mean, their takeaway was that the revive kind of really inches further towards just the way of thinking that living building challenge or living future does, where it's a lot more holistic, where it's a lot further beyond the walls. And that was really exciting for me. And I think in terms of just as a thought, to bring out to the world or, to the communities, I think that's very valuable and also just applicable and should be talked about on a
Yeah.
larger scale as well.
Yeah, I mean, right at the start, that was one of the key points, was that there's so much crossover, and it makes a lot of sense to collaborate because there is a lot of people pulling in a similar direction, and there's a lot of efficiency to be gained, and by coordinating that and organizing some of these organizations getting more aligned and joining forces. Not always easy to do because there's some slightly different points of view and different personalities, but when it can align, I think there's some pretty powerful results that can occur. Any final thoughts from you, Mary?
Well, just GBU is kind of unique in the green building world, and having put so much effort into bringing different communities together. And, it's a model that we could all learn from right there.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Hey, well, thank you very much for that. And also another shout out to particularly to Buizo, who is our sponsor for the week this week. And thanks to, really appreciate them. And quick notice that we've got Massive Impact is coming up over at Reimagine Buildings. So get into that if you're not already a member. You can find out all about Reimagine Buildings and the collective over at Passive House Accelerator. There's some really, really great content in there, and Massive Impact is coming up as well. So really good stuff coming up. All right, I think that's it for this week. Thank you very much, Mary and Ilka, and we'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.